When I turned the key in our front door that Friday evening, I expected silence. Maybe Daniel half asleep on the couch with the TV flickering in the background. Maybe the scent of frozen pizza reheated for dinner. I did not expect perfume. Sweet, floral, unfamiliar, hanging in the air like a whisper I hadn't been meant to hear. 3 hours earlier, I had still been at Judith's house, my mother-in-law's little white cottage on the edge of the marsh. I'd planned to stay through the weekend like I often did. She wasn't feeling well that morning, complained of her blood pressure acting up. But then just after lunch, she insisted I go. "Claire, I'm better now. You go on home to Daniel." Men without supervision? Trouble waiting to happen, she joked, smiling that half-knowing smile. I laughed, not because it was funny, but because that's what you do when women like Judith say things that don't feel entirely like jokes. The sun had already started its slow descent over Charleston when I drove back through our neighborhood. The air carried that damp, earthy chill of southern autumn, the kind that clings to your sleeves and settles in your bones. I remember turning onto our street and seeing the car. Red, sporty, not Daniel's, not anyone's I recognized. It was parked right in front of our building, its glossy surface catching the amber light. I pulled into my usual spot, told myself it was probably for one of the neighbors. But something about that car, the shade, too loud for someone discreet. The kind of red you pick when you want to be noticed. I took the stairs instead of the elevator, not because I was in a hurry. I had a feeling. Halfway up, I heard it. A door closing. Fast footsteps on tile. The elevator pinged above me, and whoever it was, they were gone. Inside our apartment, everything looked normal. The shoes were in their place. Coats hung neatly. Nothing out of order. But I could feel it. That subtle dissonance, like someone had moved the furniture half an inch to the left and pretended nothing changed. I set my purse down, took off my coat, called out, "Daniel." My voice didn't echo like usual. He appeared a moment later from the hallway, shirt wrinkled, hair mussed like he'd just rolled out of bed, not like someone enjoying a quiet evening alone. "Claire, you're home early." He sounded cheerful, too cheerful, like a man performing happiness. "I thought you were staying at Mom's all weekend." "She felt better," I said, watching his eyes. "Told me to come home." There it was, that flicker, the flash of panic just before he masked it with a smile. "Well, I wasn't expecting you, that's all. I was just tidying up a bit." Daniel, tidying? In 15 years of marriage, that man hadn't vacuumed unless reminded 3 times and guilt-tripped once. And yet here he was, straightening cushions like a nervous hotel manager. I followed him into the living room. The space was too clean, the pillows too neatly aligned. 2 mugs on the coffee table, one his, the other delicate, pink lipsticked. Not mine. I stared at the imprint. Rose-colored, glossy, definitely not from me. Daniel cleared his throat behind me. "Want some tea? I'll make you a cup." "Sure," I said, quietly not moving. My eyes dropped to the floor. A strand of hair, long and golden, shimmered on the rug near the couch. Not mine, not Daniel's. He'd been balding for years. I bent down and picked it up. My hand didn't shake. My heart didn't race. But something inside me shifted, clicked, like the final piece in a puzzle falling into place. I walked to the kitchen and found Daniel stirring sugar into his cup like it owed him answers. Holding up the hair between my fingers, I asked, "Daniel, whose is this?" He blinked, swallowed. "I don't know. Maybe it blew in when the window was open. It's 55 degrees out, and the windows haven't been touched since Tuesday." He smiled too quickly. "Maybe it's from a neighbor. People shed. Hair gets around." I nodded slowly, then walked to the trash and dropped it in. Of course. I watched him exhale in relief. He thought I believed him. He thought I would leave it alone. He didn't know. I had just begun. That night we had tea together. Daniel acted like everything was normal. Asked me about Judith's health, whether the drive back was smooth, whether I wanted to watch that cooking show I liked. He even offered to order takeout. I played along, smiled when he smiled, nodded at all the right places, laughed once softly at something that wasn't really funny, but the apartment felt altered, as if someone had scrubbed it down too hard and left behind the ghost of their presence. The couch still held the shape of someone else's evening. The room was filled with silence that wasn't ours. We sat at the kitchen table. He sipped his tea like a man grateful for peace. I watched the steam rise and wondered when we'd last had a conversation that didn't feel like performance. I used to know his every shift in tone, every glance. Tonight, all I saw were layers, shields. After he said goodnight and disappeared into his office, claiming he had emails to catch up on, I stayed in the kitchen, rinsing cups that were already clean. I moved slowly, deliberately. The dishes clinked too loud against the sink. Outside, the streetlight flickered like it was undecided whether to stay or go. I thought about the lipstick on the mug, the perfume in the air, the blonde hair on our rug. But most of all, I thought about what it meant that I wasn't even surprised. Maybe that was the most painful part. I had noticed the distance for months. The quick calls ending too soon. The way he no longer asked how my day went. The quiet withdrawals. And how I, being the practical woman I am, chalked it up to stress, age, marriage. I thought it was just another season. But this wasn't a season. It was a storm I'd ignored until it was at my door. I stepped into the living room again, looked around with fresh eyes. There was something new, a carefulness in how the throw blanket was folded, a stack of magazines arranged like a showroom. My house had been staged for someone else. I walked to the trash can, not even sure why, and then I saw it, nestled beneath a layer of kitchen scraps and used paper towels, a crumpled box, lacy, shiny, the kind of packaging you see at upscale lingerie boutiques. The label still visible. Expensive. The size not mine. The style not mine. The kind of thing you wear when you're hoping someone will want to undress you slowly. My fingers froze against the rim of the bin. I didn't cry. I didn't shout. I just stood there, like my bones had forgotten what to do next. Daniel had brought her here, into our home, into our space, and he thought I would know. I pressed the lid closed, washed my hands slowly, and went to our bedroom. He joined me later, a little after midnight. I pretended to be asleep. He laid down, gently beside me, the mattress shifting under his weight like a wave pulling back from the shore. He reached for me, habit, not affection, and whispered, "Tired tonight." I stayed still. He buried his face in my hair, and I remembered how that used to make me feel wanted, cherished. Now, it felt like being touched by someone who hadn't earned the right anymore. We lay there for a long time, both of us silent. He drifted off quickly, breathing deep and even, like a man who thought he'd won. I stared at the ceiling, and for the first time in 15 years, I wondered when exactly I stopped loving him. The next morning, I made coffee like I always did, measured the grounds, filled the kettle, set the mugs out without a word. Daniel shuffled in wearing the same worn t-shirt he always did on weekends, rubbing his eyes like a boy who'd overslept summer camp. "Morning, sunshine," he said, leaning down to kiss my cheek. I tilted my head just enough for the kiss to miss. He didn't notice. Over breakfast, he talked about going shopping later, maybe visiting the farmer's market, suggesting we do something together for a change. That was his exact phrasing, for a change. As if our marriage had been one long stretch of me denying him joy. I nodded, chewing toast that tasted like paper. When I mentioned I might want to swing by his mom's place again, Judith hadn't looked well yesterday, he hesitated, then perked up like I'd handed him a get-out-of-jail-free card. "Good idea. Yeah, she'll appreciate that." I was actually going to meet up with Ryan today anyway, help him pick out a car. Ryan, his old friend from work. The same Ryan who'd bought a brand new SUV 6 months ago. I remembered because Daniel had talked about it nonstop rattling off specs and mileage like a teenager describing his crush. I didn't say a word. Instead, I watched how his shoulders relaxed once he thought I had other plans. He even whistled while taking his dishes to the sink. Daniel, who usually left his plate like a lazy prince waiting for his invisible maid. By the time he left the apartment, I had already made up my mind. I sat at our dining table with my laptop, logged into our joint banking account, and began looking. Not accusingly, just curiously, like an auditor following numbers that didn't quite add up. And, oh, they didn't. There were restaurant charges, fancy ones, with wine pairings and tasting menus. Boutique purchases at places I never shopped, with names like Lily and Lace and Belle Femme. A hotel reservation canceled the morning after our anniversary. Weekly cash withdrawals, always the same amount, always on Fridays. Then I opened his email. I'd never done that before, but Daniel never bothered to sign out. And what I found wasn't shocking, it was confirming. Appointment reminders, credit card statements, one message from a jewelry store. Your order is ready for pickup. The pickup date? The exact day I'd spent with Judith baking sweet potato pie while Daniel claimed to be working late. I took screenshots, saved files, forwarded emails to myself. I didn't feel vengeful. I didn't feel broken. I felt clear, like I was stepping out of fog and finally seeing the shape of what I'd been living with. Daniel wasn't just lying. He was planning. And if he wanted to play chess, he'd forgotten something very important. He wasn't the only one who could think 4 moves ahead. By Sunday afternoon, I found myself standing outside a luxury car dealership in the heart of downtown Charleston. Sutton and Von Auto, the glass sign read, sleek and modern, all sharp lines and mirrored polish. The kind of place where they don't just sell cars, they sell personas. I took a breath and stepped inside. The air smelled like new leather and cologne. Everything gleamed. Every surface was curated, every voice softened. This was Daniel's world, where he spent hours working late, where he probably felt charming and powerful. I wasn't here to confront anyone. Not yet. I was here to look into her eyes. She found me before I found her. "Welcome in," a soft, melodic voice said. I turned and saw her. Young, maybe late 20s, early 30s if I was generous. Long blonde waves cascading down her shoulders. Navy blazer fitted perfectly to her frame. Blouse with just enough lace to whisper femininity without shouting it. Her smile was warm, professional, a little too eager. "I'm Jessica. Can I help you with anything today?" Jessica. Of course. I returned her smile. Actually, yes. I'm thinking of buying something compact, maybe a crossover. Something elegant, but practical. Perfect, she beamed. We've got some wonderful options. As she led me through the showroom, pointing out features and comparing trim levels, I let her talk. She had a gentle confidence about her, a polished sales pitch that still felt human, and underneath it all a softness, a vulnerability she probably didn't know she was showing. At one point, she mentioned a colleague who had helped her settle in when she started at the dealership. "Daniel's been amazing," she said casually. "He's really taken me under his wing. Always patient, always looking out for everyone." I tilted my head. "Daniel Sutton?" She nodded, smile softening. "Yes, he's been more than just a mentor." There it was. No shame, just a flicker of affection in her voice. I looked at the cherry red SUV behind her, the same model that had been parked outside our building Friday night. "Sounds like he's special to you." Jessica paused. I probably shouldn't be saying this, but sometimes you meet someone who sees you, even when everything else in life feels chaotic. I nodded slowly, keeping my face unreadable. "Is he married?" Her eyes faltered for a second, just one breath too long. "Technically, yes, but he says it's complicated. They've been more like roommates for years. He says she's career-obsessed. Cold. Doesn't want kids. It's been over for a long time, really." I blinked slowly. My hands stayed folded, calm. I wanted to scream, but instead I said, "It's hard, isn't it?" believing someone when they say they're unhappy but still haven't left. She looked at me then, really looked. You sound like you know. I've lived long enough to learn the difference between a hard marriage and a dishonest one. We stood there for a moment, the silence between us stretching. Not awkward, just fragile. Jessica smiled, smaller this time. You're very kind. Not many women would understand. I reached out and lightly touched her arm. Be careful with your heart, Jessica. Some men wear honesty like a costume. The moment the lights go out, you'll find yourself alone in the dark. She didn't respond, just nodded slowly. I turned toward the door. Thanks for your time. I'll think it over. Of course, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Come back anytime. As I walked out of that spotless showroom, I realized something. She wasn't a villain. Not yet. She was just a girl, still clinging to a story someone else had written for her. I packed a suitcase that night, neatly, methodically, just the way someone would if they were actually traveling for business. I even printed a fake itinerary, slipped it between some files, laid out 2 tailored work outfits and 1 sensible dress. Nothing flashy, nothing that would suggest revenge. When Daniel came home, I was folding my charger and slipping it into the front pocket of my bag. He looked startled. Where are you going? I told you last week, I said, not even looking up. There's a 3-day audit in Colombia. They bumped up the schedule. I leave in the morning. Oh, he said, trying to sound casual. You sure you have to go? You've been running yourself into the ground lately. I zipped the bag. That's the job, remember? He hesitated, then smiled. Well, maybe some time away will be good for both of us. There it was, the relief. So faint you'd miss it if you weren't looking for it. But I was. I saw the way his shoulders settled, the way his hand slipped into his pocket to check his phone the moment he thought I wouldn't notice. I didn't sleep that night, not because I was angry, but because I was calculating. By 8 a.m., I rolled the suitcase to the car and let him kiss me goodbye at the curb like the loving husband he believed he could still pretend to be. He waved from the porch. I smiled from the driver's seat, and I turned the corner 2 blocks away, parked near a little cafe called Rose and Time. It was the kind of place you could sit for hours with a laptop and no one would ask questions. I ordered a coffee, opened my email, and waited. I didn't have to wait long. At 10:04 a.m., my cell buzzed. Hey, sweetheart, Daniel said, syrup in his voice. Train ride going okay? It's fine, I replied. Just past Columbia, I think. I lied with a straight face, watching the window beside me reflect the same sidewalk bench and lamppost I'd been staring at for an hour. Miss you already, he said. Take care of yourself. You too, I whispered and hung up. 15 minutes later, my work phone rang. Hi, this is Jessica from Sutton and Vaughan. We met yesterday. I knew exactly who it was. I remember, I said warmly. Sorry to bother you on a Sunday, but Daniel asked me to check in about the SUV you liked. He said you might have questions. I leaned back in my chair, heart suddenly quiet. That's very thoughtful. He's not working today, is he? No, he's off, she said quickly. He told me he's free all day. She paused, as if she realized something too late. He's free all day, I smiled into the phone. Well, I'm out of town until Thursday, but I'll stop by after I return. After we both hung up, I sat in silence for a long time. He'd cleared his schedule for her, and she thought he was doing it for love, but he was doing it for convenience. And I was about to make it very inconvenient. I didn't go to Columbia. Instead, I drove straight to Judith's house. The old brick bungalow hadn't changed much in 20 years. Same azaleas along the porch. Same crooked mailbox with the brass DS initials from when Daniel fixed it during our first Christmas together. Back then, Judith used to call him her golden boy. Now I wasn't so sure. She answered the door slowly, leaning on her cane. Back so soon? Plans changed, I said softly. Her eyes searched mine. You didn't sleep last night. I didn't respond. Instead, I reached for her hand and guided her to her favorite armchair, the one near the window. I sat across from her and took a long breath. I think Daniel's having an affair. She blinked once, then twice, then looked down at her lap. After a long silence, she said, "No." I stiffened. "He told me a few weeks ago," she continued. "Said things weren't working between you two. That he'd met someone who made him feel alive again. He made it sound poetic." "And you didn't tell me?" She winced. I didn't want to believe it. Thought maybe he was just venting. Or confused. "You've always been the steady one. And Daniel, well, he was never very good with stability, was he?" I swallowed. My mouth felt like it was full of cotton. "I'm not here to ask for loyalty," I said. "I just need you to know what I'm about to do. I'm not doing it out of revenge. I'm doing it to protect myself from being erased." Judith nodded slowly. "Tell me what you need." "Nothing. Just don't warn him." She looked out the window for a moment, then whispered, "I won't." I left her with a kiss on the forehead, and for the first time in months, her eyes looked soft again, like the woman who once sewed my hem on our wedding day. Then I drove across town to the tiny floral shop where my best friend, Marcy, worked. Marcy had known me since college. She was the only person who'd seen me sob over term papers, toast my engagement, and talk myself out of divorce at least 3 times over wine and microwaved lasagna. When she saw my face, she didn't ask questions, just pulled off her apron, locked the shop door, and brewed a pot of lemon tea like it was medicine. I showed her the screenshots, the receipts, the forwarded emails. She didn't say, "I told you so." She didn't pity me. She leaned back and said, "Okay, so how do we break him?" I laughed. Actually laughed. For the first time in days. "I don't want to break him," I said. "I want to walk away in silence and let him hear the echo of my absence for the rest of his life." She nodded. "You want your story back." "Exactly." Marcy poured the tea. "Then let's write the ending on your terms." And just like that, I didn't feel alone anymore. I spent the next 3 days in a quiet cottage on Edisto Island. It wasn't far, just an hour from Charleston, but it felt like another world. The kind of place where the tides answered to no one and the pines whispered secrets only the wind could hear. There was no cell signal in the cottage, just a fireplace, a screened porch, and a view of the marsh that shifted colors with the sky. I didn't bring work. I didn't even bring books, just a notebook and silence. Every morning, I brewed tea and watched the fog lift off the water. Every night, I listened to the cicadas hum while the fire cracked behind me. I wrote letters I never intended to send. To Daniel, to myself, to the girl I used to be before I became someone's wife. There was no dramatic breakdown, just small unravelings, the kind that felt more like release than ruin. By the 3rd night, I wasn't angry anymore. Not sad either. I just didn't want to return to a life that felt so thoroughly staged, where love was performative and forgiveness meant forgetting. I didn't need to confront him. I needed to leave before I forgot what it felt like to be whole. When I finally drove back into the city, it was raining. Not the kind of rain that lashes, but the kind that softens. Gentle, persistent cleansing. I parked 2 blocks from our apartment and walked the rest of the way, hood up, breath steady. Daniel didn't hear me come in. He was in the kitchen, singing along to the radio as he stirred something on the stove. He wore the apron I had bought him 2 Christmases ago, the one that said Mr. Fix-It. He looked content, like a man who'd just cheated the world out of one more truth. I stood in the doorway for a moment, watching him. Then I said, "I'm home." He spun around, surprised. "Hey, you're early." "Plans changed," I replied. He smiled. "I made chicken piccata. Thought I'd surprise you when you got back." I nodded, placing my umbrella by the door. "Thanks." He hesitated. "You okay?" "I will be." He came closer. "I missed you." I met his eyes. "Did you?" Something flickered across his face. Confusion, maybe. Or guilt. Or the sudden realization that I wasn't playing along anymore. I didn't hug him. Didn't kiss him. I walked past him into the bedroom and calmly opened my drawer. Inside was the envelope I had prepared 2 nights before. The printed statements. The photographs. The letter. I left it on the kitchen counter. He didn't ask what it was. He didn't follow me. He just stood there as I walked into the guest room and shut the door behind me. That night, I slept like a woman who had nothing left to pretend. The next morning, Daniel left early. He didn't say much, just mumbled something about meetings and needing to pick up dry cleaning. I let him go. I didn't want an argument. I wanted clarity. By noon, I sat across from my attorney, Leonard Price, a soft-spoken man in his 60s, always dressed in charcoal suits and patterned ties that looked hand-picked by a wife who knew what flattered him best. He reviewed the envelope I'd handed over, screenshots, financial records, time-stamped texts from Jessica's dealership email. His brow furrowed with each page. "I've seen worse," he finally said, closing the folder. "But this is clean, and it's enough." I nodded. "I don't want to burn the house down. I just want out." He studied me. "You've invested 16 years into this marriage, Claire. The law won't let him walk away with more than he deserves. I'm not fighting for scraps. I'm fighting for peace." Leonard smiled, then reached for a second file. "Daniel came to see me. Yesterday, actually." My stomach tightened. "He what?" "He wanted to discuss a preliminary settlement. Said he felt things were heading south and hoped to preserve dignity on both sides." I stared. "He's already trying to negotiate?" Leonard leaned back. "He offered you the beach house, the Volvo, and half the joint account. In exchange, you don't touch his company's shares or pension." I laughed. A sharp, bitter sound. "That's rich." "You could get far more," Leonard added gently. "We both know the timeline. His affair didn't start last week." I nodded slowly. "I want the downtown apartment." He blinked. "Not the beach house?" "No. That apartment has history. I made it a home while he used it as a backdrop. I want him to feel the absence every time he passes by that street." Leonard smiled again, this time with quiet admiration. "And the car?" "He can keep it. I'll lease something new." "And the pension?" "I don't need his money," I said. "I need him to know I don't want it." Leonard jotted down notes, then looked at me. "That's not how most people approach divorce." "I'm not most people." Just as we stood to leave, he paused and tapped the edge of the file. "One more thing. He's trying to refinance a loan under both your names. A property in Bluffton. He listed it as a joint business venture, without telling you." My pulse spiked. "What property?" Leonard handed me a copy of the filing. "A lake house. Bought 6 months ago. Jessica's name is nowhere on it. But I'd bet everything in my wallet she's picked out the curtains." I stared at the paper. The signature beside mine. A forgery. Sloppy, but close enough to fool a bank clerk. He hadn't just betrayed me. He'd gambled on my silence. I looked up at Leonard. "We go to court." "No negotiation?" "No more pretending." He nodded. "Then let's begin." The courtroom was colder than I expected. Not in temperature, but in silence. That thick, sterile kind of quiet where no one breathes too loudly, where every chair creak feels like a declaration. I sat beside Leonard, hands folded in my lap. Dressed in navy, plain, unthreatening, steady. The color of control. Daniel arrived 10 minutes late. He looked rushed but polished. Charcoal blazer. Silver tie I bought him 3 birthdays ago. Jessica wasn't with him, though I saw her lingering outside the hall, pacing with her phone pressed tight to her ear. He didn't look at me when he sat down. Didn't nod. Didn't acknowledge 16 years of shared life. When the proceedings began, he kept glancing toward his own attorney. Some young guy in a slick suit who tried too hard to look confident. It didn't matter. They didn't have enough. Not after Leonard laid out the property fraud, the falsified signature, the mismatched dates, and Jessica's emails subpoenaed from the dealership server. For every lie Daniel had layered, we had a paper trail. He still tried to argue. "She left the marriage emotionally a long time ago," he said on record. "I was just moving on." Leonard didn't flinch. "And she was still paying the mortgage while you financed a love nest behind her back. That doesn't sound like someone who checked out." Daniel's jaw clenched. "She didn't want to have children. That drove a wedge between us." I met his gaze across the courtroom. "Calm. Steady. You knew that before we married. You said you understood." He looked away. There was a short recess before closing remarks. I stepped into the hallway for air. Jessica saw me then. She froze by the vending machine, eyes wide. She looked younger than I remembered. Maybe it was the way she tried to dress older, as if pearls and pumps could erase the truth. She opened her mouth, then shut it. I walked past her. That silence was louder than any insult. Back inside, the judge read through our final positions. Leonard requested full ownership of the downtown apartment, spousal support waived, and an injunction against any future joint loans. We were granted all of it. Even the lake house Daniel tried to hide was ordered to be sold. The proceeds split evenly, minus penalties for document forgery. He paled when the ruling was read. I didn't smile, didn't gloat. I just stood, gathered my coat, and nodded at Leonard. As I walked out of that courtroom, Daniel called after me, low and urgent. "Claire." I turned once. "I didn't mean for it to end like this," he said. I thought you'd fight for me." I looked at him for a long moment, then said quietly, "I did. For years. You just never noticed." His face collapsed under the weight of everything he could no longer deny. I walked away, and this time I wasn't looking back. The downtown apartment was quiet when I returned. No longer sterile, but sacred. The kind of silence that wrapped around you like a warm coat instead of pressing down on your chest like grief. I set my keys in the ceramic dish by the door and kicked off my shoes. The rain had followed me home again, but this time it didn't feel ominous. It felt like permission. I made tea, not out of habit, but for comfort. Then I sat at the kitchen table and opened my notebook. The same one I'd scribbled into on Edisto Island. Pages filled with fragments of memory and pieces of a woman I hadn't met in years. I wasn't writing to Daniel anymore, or even to the past. I was writing to myself, finally, fully. Not the accountant, not the wife, not the careful version I'd curated to make everyone else feel comfortable. Just me. Claire. In the weeks that followed, I changed the locks, repainted the walls, and replaced the living room couch that Daniel used to nap on during football Sundays. Judith called once, said she was sorry for what she didn't say sooner. I told her I forgave her. I meant it. Forgiveness wasn't for Daniel. It was for me. One afternoon, Marcy dropped off a box of wildflower seeds and a note that read, "Plant something that won't leave you." I cried. Then I bought 3 pots, filled them with soil, and waited for something to bloom. It did. Not all at once, not perfectly, but slowly, stubbornly, like hope. I started going to poetry readings on Thursday nights, alone. I joined a book club that didn't care if you finished the book. I wore red lipstick to the grocery store just because I liked the way it looked under those awful fluorescent lights. I walked the city streets without rushing, letting my heels echo against the pavement like a song only I could hear. There were men, eventually, some kind, some forgettable, some that reminded me I was still wanted, still worthy, but none that made me want to hand over the pen again. This time I was writing my story. This time I wasn't looking to be rescued. I was the rescue, and I didn't need a grand ending. Just space to breathe, space to be, space to grow back into someone I never should have left behind. One rainy evening, months after the court ruling, I stood by the window with my tea in hand. A familiar song played low on the radio, one Daniel used to hum while making Sunday pancakes. I didn't flinch. I didn't rewind. I simply listened, smiled, and let it pass. That's the thing about healing. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't knock on your door and declare, "You've made it." It creeps in quietly. A moment here, a breath there, until one day you realize the hurt no longer owns the loudest room in your chest. And what remains is peace.